for this week. It's so nice to have you here. This is a great class as well if you're returning in the early postpartum period and just really wanting to start that process of moving towards the energized and strong classes, but wanting to take it really slow and mindful. Or if you've had some time away from exercise or yoga and you want to refamiliarize yourself with those main core kind of demands and the connection between the brain and the body, this is going to be a nice practice for that. So let's come to lie on the back. If you've got a block handy, it's going to be a good one for this class. If not, you could use a book. And just come to lie on the back and bend the knees up, rest on the feet. And take a couple of full deep belly breaths. Maybe using the hands if you feel comfortable, just to start to reacquaint yourself with the rib cage, the abdomen, the oblique muscles, the hip points there, the ASIS, the glutes. Back of neck is long, and then just noticing that the sacrum can be tilted to exacerbate the arch in the lower back and to flatten it completely. So just coming into a position in the pelvic girdle here, which is somewhere in the middle between the two, and taking a few more deep breaths. On the contraction, the exhale, you notice that the belly naturally falls, and then you can start to work with that natural contraction by slightly bracing and engaging and lifting through the core and pelvic floor at the bottom of the exhale. Inhale, we can actively expand the belly up and out and away and expand through the side of the ribs and draw as much air into the body to inflate as we can. Pause at the top of the inhale and then exhale, begin that slow contraction aided by the muscular effort of lifting, drawing in and down and squeezing every last bit of air out of the body. And then taking the legs long here, you're going to come into a banana shape to really open through the side body. So lift the hips up and over to the right and the legs over to the left, and maybe even that right ankle could cross over the left. Little bend in the right knee might help, and then the arms can stretch up and over. You can even take that right wrist with the left fingers and just nestle the head down into that armpit or left bicep. And just breathing nice and full and deep here to open through maybe the underarm all the way down the obliques, the psoas and the piriformis and the TFL, and all the way down the side of that right body. Continuing the expansive softening on the inhale and then the contracting and bracing slightly on the exhale. And then coming back through center to shift over and complete that banana stretch on the other side. So hips come and lift over to the left, and left leg maybe crosses left ankle with the right, and taking the left wrist with the right fingers. And you can even, lift up and out of that shoulder girdle by slightly pulling or tugging on that left arm. And again, making sure that the jaw is nice and soft here. Even doing a bit of a kind of massagey kind of release. Just a wiggle and then big breaths into that left side body. And at the bottom of the exhale, you can wiggle yourself back into the center, so shift the pelvis and plant the feet, lift the hips up, and just put that block underneath the very lowest part of the spine, just at the sacrum there, and reach around and tap the glutes and make sure they're kind of hanging over the edge. And then in this position here, we're just going to start to raise each foot alternating. So let's push down through the left, just slightly, contract slightly through the lower abdomen and pelvic floor to raise that right foot to tabletop. You'll notice there that that's requiring some contraction. The hip flexors are working to flex the hip and also the knee. And the core is working to lift the weight of that right leg. keep the pelvis in that neutral position as you lower the right foot down to the ground, and then maybe plant slightly down through that right foot to stabilize you as you then lift your left leg up into deep hip flexion. Or some hip flexion. It's not truly deep. Truly deep would be like that. We don't want to do that. We want to just come to the table and then drop that left foot down. And then you can start to, alternate slightly more readily here between the two, marching. And then again, maybe if you feel comfortable, you can start to touch. Just notice the position of the ribs and the hips as you flex, alternating legs. And then drop both down. Big inhale. Exhale, contract and draw everything down and up. So the ribs are drawing down, the pelvis is drawing down, but the pelvic floor is drawing up, and then push down through the heels to just micro lift the glutes up off the block, just a tiny, like 1 centimeter, and then drop it down. And the arms can be, it can be nice to have them out in a T position here. Or I like to also imagine that I'm drawing them like a W, so my elbows are drawing down to my sides, and that really encourages external rotation of the humeral head in the glenoid fossa. So this upper body here is nice and open, but I'm still drawing down with my ribs, lifting up through my pelvic floor slightly, and then just clearing that block in these little micro pulses. The glutes can release, and then they squeeze to lift up off the block. And then if that feels okay, you can stay up and not actually touch the block. It's such a tiny movement. It's just like these tiny little pulses here, keeping everything else in the body stable as we just use the glutes to just tiny, tiny pulses. Open and close that hip joint just slightly. Otherwise you're coming down in between. 3, 2, 1. And then now extend the arms out to a T if you took that W position, and take them all the way up and overhead. Elevate the scapula and the humeral up towards the ears to really get long through the side body. And then you can take the hands down, lift the hips up, and take that block out from underneath. And then make a little bit of a diamond position here on your lower abdomen. You can touch the hip bones with the fingers, and then maybe come in just an inch or half an inch from there. And just, if you feel okay, if it feels really tender, then obviously go gently. But if you feel okay with just pressing down slightly there in that position, that's where we're going to find some contact with our deep transverse abdominis, so our TVA muscles. Inhale, we soften and we breathe into those fingers. Exhale, we retreat by drawing in together, and then a slight contraction of that deep transverse abdominal muscles there. You might start to be able to sense with our fingers that there's a bracing or a contraction and a slight, strength. And just going between a softening and a full deep inhale, and then an exhale, a retreating, a contracting, and maybe even a hardening or a bracing, just slightly through those lower abdominal muscles. And if you can't actually feel any real sensation of contraction and hardening into the fingers here, hardening's, it sounds wrong because it's not like we want to go like, that's too much. But that is essentially what we're looking for back into the fingers compared to the softness of the expansion. But if you can't feel that, that doesn't matter. That's the work of just this effort of reminding the body where it is we want to do a particular thing for us. And by touching, we can help the mind, the nervous system make those connections. Reacquainting. A couple more times. Big inhale, exhale, contract, squeeze in, and brace slightly. And then we're going to take the hands behind the head. You can rest the skull back into the hands. We're just going to imagine that we would lift up off the shoulders. So what this is a memory sit-up. So we're just softening on the big inhale, and then on the exhale we're imagining that we're drawing our ribs together and down towards our hips, and then we contract and contract so much flexion through the front body musculature that it would actually lift the back body up off the floor. But we're not coming up. Inhale, soften that effort, expand, maybe even slightly extend, to create a bigger arch in the lower back, and then contract, 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 draw everything together and down. Rib cage draws down to hips so much that we can actually lift up off the ground. One more time here, just reminding your brain what it's like to do spinal flexion and do a sit-up. Squeeze, 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 and release. What's next on my little plan here? Oh yes, okay. Now we are going to come up, but we're only going to come up on one side. So inhale, exhale, squeeze everything, and just like a sticker, you're just going to peel the right scapula up off the ground, and you're still resting on that left forearm and left shoulder blade. So it's like you're just peeling half a sticker of your back body up off the ground and looking towards the left. And then come back down, inhale. Exhale to contract and brace and flex and lift just that left side of our back body up off the ground. Left shoulder like a sticker peels up and off the ground. Inhale. Exhale. Keep back of neck long and head heavy back into hands. Inhale. Lift up, exhale. 2 more times here. Lift up, exhale. Squeeze, squeeze, squeeze. Resist wanting to lift up and go harder and bigger too soon here. We're just reacquainting our body with our brain. Lift and peel. Squeeze. But notice you've kept that tiny space in the lower back. So you're still in your neutral pelvic position, and then let everything go here. Good job. Hopefully some of those neural connections are starting to reawaken and refire. I'm going to come and stand at the top of our mat here. Rolling the shoulders back and down, and I'm just going to practice some hip hinging here. So the legs are going to stay straight. Tiny bend in the knees. As we fold forward, send the hips back. You might be familiar with a deadlift if you were going to go down and lift a barbell or some weights at the gym. But your hands are just going to rest on your knees or your shins as you come up and down from this hip hinging position. So keeping everything stable in the upper body, the head, the spine, just hinging at the hips. It's like we're tilting forward into an L and then coming all the way up. So you might also feel like the glutes are going back in space a little bit, keeping a slight bend in the knees. And if we can get used to keeping our spine in a neutral position and our pelvis in a neutral position, as we bend down in this hinging way, we actually do strengthen the back chain, which is going to mean we get less lower back pain and tightness. And then we're going to now turn this into a forward fold. So you can now flex a little bit more through the spine and let the hands drop down wherever they come. Oops. If the back body's feeling particularly tight, you can use that block just to rest a little bit of the weight of the upper body on. And then we're going to come, plant the hands and step down into a tabletop or a quadruped position. So before we come into an active hip extension here, I want you to just scan from the crown of the head, back of neck is long, drawing up and out of the shoulders in terms of a forward pulling or a lifting. Tuck the chin. Extending through the neck there. And then come to the wrists. Are they stacked underneath the elbows and shoulders, slight bend in the elbows, scapula are not retracting and not protracting excessively, just somewhere in the middle there, collarbones are broad, neutral pelvis so we're not arching too much or flexing too much in the thoracic and lumbar spine. And then extend the right foot back to the tiptoes, and then again, just re-scan through the quadruped position and make sure that you've stayed somewhat neutral and aligned, and then lift up. so that the right leg is extended back behind you and the pelvis stays stable and steady and even. And then from this position, we're just going to raise the back of the heel up and down slightly, little tiny kicks, extension at the hips. And this, it looks kind of lame, but it's really hard. So if you're here and you're working really hard, that's beautiful, just stay there. If you want to bear more weight in the right hand, you maybe come to the left fingertips or take the left hand. You know, this is again more challenging to keep the body in the neutral position while we extend through the hip. If you want to take the left fingertips to the left temple, or even extend the left arm deep. Shoulder flexion. Really tricky for another 3, 2, 1. And then bring everything back down to the ground. Inhale. And then on the exhale, you can just nudge your hips more into extension, so your pelvis sinks down to the ground, but you're still resisting gravity by lifting up through pelvic floor and drawing the core and ribs together to the core, the deep center of your body, and then widen the hands a little bit here. And we're just going to do some wide push-ups. So we're just going to slowly build up to it. So a tiny micro bend and then push away. Keeping the skull and the spine and the pelvis in one plane here. So just bend the elbows out to the side and push back up. Push back up. Maybe increasing the range. 2 more. And then this time we're going to lower all the way down to the ground. Maybe replant the hands more in line with the boobs and draw the belly button up and away from the ground. Extend long through the crown of the head. Roll the shoulders back and squeeze the scapula together and down. And squeeze the glutes to extend the back body here. Cobra pose. Pointing through my toes to keep my legs really active. And then I'm going to now contract as much as I can through the front body to push through a low plank position. And that's really tricky. So if you need to use your hands to push more, that's fine. You work with where you're at. And we're going to push to down dog. The hips up and back, and keep a nice deep bend in the knees to keep that hip flexion to allow the posterior chain of the body to release. And you relax through the back of the neck here, and then slowly walk the hands back to the feet. And slowly rolling, not hinging now, actually flexing through the spine to roll all the way up to standing. And we're going to do some walks. So first of all is marching on the spot, flexing at the hip, lifting alternative legs to a stalk pose or a marching pose. And then when we raise the right leg, we raise the right arm back behind us and we look towards our right. And we drop that all the way down and then with the left, and then extend left arm, right arm, look towards the left. And then we're going to do that in motion now all at once. So we raise right, turn to right, drop everything down, raise left, turn to left. Keeping core and hips integrated and facing front, but just twisting through the thoracic spine. And then slowly rolling one vertebra at a time all the way down. Halfway lift, coming to that L position like we did in the hip hinges, extending out of the waist and fold forward. Let the hands step back. Low plank. Tiny micro push-ups here. So the arms are slightly wider than they might be in a traditional chaturanga or a tricep push-up. And this time we're going to come all the way down to the ground. Roll the humeral head back, clip the scapula together and down the back. And maybe take the fingertips up off the ground if you can here. Lifting the belly button up and away from the ground, and then taking the fingertips to the temples. Tiny lift, like the back extension here, is really small but really challenging to maintain. And then plant the hands, push through the low plank, maybe through quadruped, lift up, down dog. And we'll do that all at the right side now. So bend the knees, look to the hands, and maybe walk, shuffle, hop, however you need to get to the top of the mat. Roll the shoulders back and down. Maybe just reacquainting yourself again with the position of the hips, the glutes, and then we're going to come back into those hip hinges or deadlifts. We might know them as if you've done some strength work at the gym. So sending the hips back to flex, keeping the top of the body in an even plane. And ideally we're getting into the habit of this sort of bending as we're coming down to the ground to pick up toys or clothes or all manner of things that you find on the ground in your house in early motherhood. So it's really good to strengthen the lower back, not put as much strain on those muscles when we do flex. And last time, now we're going to come down, 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 and then into a forward fold. Let the head go. Maybe shake, 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 and then come back through the quadruped position of those kicks that we did on the right side. So now we're going to extend the left leg back. Check. From crown of head to tips of toes, all those postural cues and alignment points that I give you, just feel them in your body in an easy, kind of fluid way here, scanning through. And then lift the left leg up off the ground into those tiny extension kicks. So we're keeping the left hip joint open and squeezing the left glute to just lift the heel up and down slightly while we keep the pelvis in that neutral position, hips down. And then if that feels okay, you can bear more weight in the left hand and come up onto the right fingertips, or take right fingers to temple. Tricky. So much demand on the core to keep the body nice and stable and steady, and then maybe you can even extend the right arm, reaching up and out of the core by elevating the scapula and the humeral up to that right ear. Back of neck is long. 3, 2, 1, plant both hands and feet, and maybe just a little bit of a fluid cat-cow here before we nudge the hips back. Knees back, sink the hips down, but resist gravity. So there's not a collapsing there and arching through the lower back. There's one long line from crown of head through shoulder girdle down to pelvic girdle, down to knees. And then maybe creep the hands slightly wider as we come back to those wide angle push-ups. Building some chest strength rather than tricep strength here, which is going to be really good for counteracting the kind of tight and weak front body we can get from lots of holding, being in spinal flexion, rounding through the front body. 3, 2, 1. Slowly lower all the way down. Draw the scapula together and down. And then the hands can come out into a T-shaped position as we lift up and the forehead comes away from the ground. They can come to temples. I like to imagine there's little magnets on the back of my elbows, so lifting me up and away from the ground and giving myself a double chin. And active all the way through my legs, my glutes, to the tips of my toes. Belly button is drawing up for 3, 2, 1. Plant hands. Push back. Lift hips down. Coming into the last bit of this sequence, so walking the hands back to the mat, back to the feet, sorry, to the back of the mat, and then slowly curling up. We're going to come back into those marches, starting with just the flexion of the hip and knee, and then coming to integrate the thoracic twisting, arms extended to that T shape, and we're twisting towards the leg, we're lifting. And then we're going to now turn that into a movement up the mat, keeping the pelvis facing forward as we move. Top of mat. Arms up, inhale. Fold forward, exhale, all the way down. Plant hands, release through the back of the head. And then use your hands if you need to support you to plop your bum down on the ground. We're going to come back to that bridge floor work. using your hands if you need to support yourself all the way down, and then maybe lifting the pelvis to slide that block underneath. And now that we've done, slightly more demanding hip extension when we've been standing on one leg, just coming back into that hip hinging from the very start of class, noticing how does it feel now in the body. Maybe are the messages between the brain and the muscles firing slightly more readily or fluidly? And if not, that's okay. This is such a beautiful opportunity to take it slow as we return to a yoga practice after having a baby or some time out, Such a temptation to want to rush and be able to do something that's a bit harder or objectively more challenging, but there's so much on offer here in terms of really tuning in and really working on the main demands of the practice as we reacquaint mind and body in this postpartum world. And then coming into those micro pulses here, so pushing down slightly through the heels and lifting through the pelvic floor and bracing through the core slightly to just come up the block. Maybe stay up and do these tiny pulses. Notice here how we are still using the glutes to extend at the hip like we did when we were in quadruped and we're doing the leg kicks. We're just doing it in a different position. So that's pretty cool. Noticing how the glutes fire a little bit more readily here, or does this feel a little bit more accessible than maybe it did at the beginning? And then coming down, and then taking the block out and resting the sacrum down on the ground, and maybe just giving the tummy a little bit of love here if that feels like something you could just try on. And sometimes I need to fake it till I make it in this way, so I imagine that I'm perhaps lovingly caressing my baby or my husband or a really close friend, and I'm just there's no judgment there at all. There's just this warmth and love and wonder and respect. And then if you would like to, you can extend your legs long for Shavasana. You can maybe come into a slight butterfly position here, or you could knock the knees together, and I find this position feels really supported for a postpartum body. Just opening slightly more through the back body, and letting the knees fall to the midline. And you can stay here and rest. That's the end of our practice together today. I'll see you soon.